All right, so, Dr. Hughes, let's go past that text and talk about, go past that text and continue after that text.
Sure. So there was, Mr. Depp apologized to Ms. Heard for that incident. Mr. Depp said in his UK testimony, well, I only maybe playfully tapped her on the back with my foot. Mr. Depp texted Paul Bettany and talked about how he was so drunk and out of control and engaged in bad behavior. He texted his friend Patty Smith a very similar type of text about how drunk and out of control he was. And then finally, Amber Heard wrote an email talking about how distressed and heartbroken she was.
Objection, hearsay.
I mean, I don't agree.
I know. Sustained. I'll sustain the objection. Next question.
All right. Can you give another example?
I think those are all I can remember at this point.
Okay. What if any, sorry, I'm going to have to go a little bit further here. So you concluded that Amber Heard used psychological abuse and some reactive physical violence, I think I heard you say. Is that correct?
Objection, leading.
Overruled.
Can you please explain to the jury what you meant by that?
Yes, that is correct. That, Amber Heard reported to me some of the behaviors that she used that were psychologically aggressive, the name calling, the putting him down and calling him very bad names and insulting his fatherhood, and she was very shamed and remorseful about that. She also indicated, using, and as some of the testing showed, minor forms of violence, pushing, shoving, throwing objects. We see that a lot with women when there's not proportional force. Women are more likely to throw objects. And then the more severe act of punching him, which a punch falls in the more severe category, and the context, as she explained it, was that he was coming after Whitney, and she stood, her sister, and she stood in the way and she punched him.
Now, does that make Amber Heard a perpetrator of intimate partner violence?
Objection, leading.
Overruled.
So that was one of the tasks that I had to consider. That was one of the hypotheses that I had to consider. And given all of the other data, that was not my opinion.
Now, you stated that you read a number of therapy records. Please tell the jury, why are therapy records important?
Therapy records are critical for a forensic psychologist. When we have the opportunity to go back in time and see what a person was dealing with, what the content of their distress was, and what the symptoms of their distress was, it really gives us a snapshot in time. So they become very critical as part of the overall forensic psychological evaluation, because we as psychologists understand how people sort of treat in therapy and what to look for. So in looking back at Ms. Heard's therapy records, we see sort of real-time unfolding of this dynamic in this relationship. We see early on in her notes in her report with Bonnie Jacobs and in Dr. Bonnie Jacobs' notes, reports of constant concerns about Mr. Depp's substance abuse, constant concerns about him passing out and vomiting, constant concerns about not
Objection,
wanting to...
Your Honor. Hearsay.
She can characterize that and say she relied on that.
Overruled.
Thank you. Please continue.
Constant concerns about how do I get him into treatment, how do I get him help. Ms. Heard starts going to Al-Anon at this point, early 2012, in the beginning of the relationship, because she has to figure out and wants to figure out a way to support the man that she's dating right now and the man who she's falling madly in love with. There are reports in Dr. Jacobs' notes early on about his controlling behavior, about his jealousy behavior, about him not wanting to do certain jobs, of not wanting her to wear certain clothes. So this is going back to 2012 with no indication of why would she be saying that but for the sole purpose of trying to get help and trying to get guidance in this relationship that she finds so difficult. There are indications, as I mentioned before, of the sexual assault and the sexual abuse, and how he would, when he was angry and when he was drunk, it was mostly drug and alcohol fueled rage when he would, throw her on the bed and try to have sex with her. And then, if he was not able to perform, he would get more angry at her and blame her. So we have this dynamic of blaming her for his inability to take responsibility for his behavior. Those themes were throughout Dr. Jacobs' notes.
Did Dr. Jacobs assign any diagnoses to Amber Heard?
She did.
Which
Early
one?
on, she diagnosed her with panic disorder, and then later with post-traumatic stress disorder.
All right. And did Dr. Jacobs diagnose Amber Heard with borderline personality disorder?
No, she did not.
Histrionic personality disorder?
No, she did not.
And is that important?
That's very important when we're trying to figure out the course of somebody's illness, the course of somebody's psychiatric difficulties. As I stated, well, I don't think I got to state, personality disorders usually start in adolescence early.
Objection.
I'll sustain the objection. Next
Okay.
question.
Okay. You also stated that you reviewed Dr. Connell Cowan's treatment notes, correct?
Correct.
And you also read his deposition testimony?
Correct.
And you had how long of a collateral interview with him?
I believe it was 2 hours.
Okay. And what did you get from all of that data?
So by the time that she gets to Dr. Connell Cowan, which is 2014, I believe, September 2014, is when Dr. Kipper comes on the scene. Ms. Heard's psychological functioning is significantly deteriorated. She's suffering more anxiety, more sleeplessness, more agitation, more emotional dysregulation, this fluctuation in moods. And when you sort of look at the records of what happened in those first 2 years from Dr. Jacobs, and now we have up to Dr. Connell Cowan, and we see all of the incidents that she was exposed to, including the sexual violence and the coercive control, it makes sense to me that her status, her psychological functioning has deteriorated. And in Dr. Connell Cowan's notes, that's what he's always trying to do. He's trying to help Mr. Depp, help her act in a way so that Mr. Depp does not hurt her. Dr. Connell Cowan was very concerned for Amber Heard's safety, as was Dr. Bonnie Jacobs. Dr. Jacobs was very concerned for her safety, and she continued to talk about safety aspects for Ms. Heard, as was Connell Cowan. They did, both of them, both therapists, understood, and Ms. Heard talked to them about it, that there were times that she fought back and she used violence, and times that she screamed and she said things that she didn't want to. But nevertheless, that did not change the balance for them either, and they were very concerned that because of Mr. Depp's significant substance abuse and his sort of poorly controlled anger, that at some point he was going to seriously hurt her.
Did Dr. Cowan provide Ms. Heard with a diagnosis of borderline personality disorder?
No, he did not.
Did he diagnose Amber Heard with histrionic personality disorder?
No, he did not.
Is that important?
It's important that you have an individual, Ms. Heard, who's in therapy for over 2 years with one therapist and over 2 years with another therapist, and you're not seeing those characteristics of a personality disorder. If the manifestation of a person's difficulties and illness and symptomatology is better explained by another disorder, then you don't qualify for the personality disorder. You can't get the diagnosis. That's part of the criteria. So if it's not a pervasive pattern in a variety of contexts, and it can't be better explained by her trauma experience and the exposure and the symptoms as a result of that trauma, then you don't get a personality disorder. And that's why they didn't diagnose it.
Did you read Dr. Amy Banks' deposition testimony?
Yes, I did.
And what were her findings?
So Dr. Banks had one session, one couple session with Mr. Depp and Ms. Heard. Dr. Banks is very reputable. She works up at the Harvard Medical School Cambridge Victim of Violence Program, which is a very well-known program for understanding
Objection, Your Honor.
What's the objection?
It's non-responsive to the question. The question was, what was the findings?
All right.
Tell the jury who Dr. Amy Banks is.
And just like I said, so she's somebody who has a wealth of experience in understanding intimate partner violence and the dynamics of violent relationships. But she only had one session with the couple, and it was her determination when they were both there and the violence was talked about that Mr. Depp did not deny the violence that he perpetrated toward Miss Heard. She also did, as everybody has, all of our other therapists, because Miss Heard admitted as such, that she also used low levels of violence as well. So Dr. Amy Banks had that opinion.
Did you review Dr. Laurel Anderson's treatment notes and read her deposition?
Yes, I did.
Okay, and what was the significance of what you learned from Dr. Anderson?
So Dr. Anderson similarly thought that there was violence and abuse in this relationship. She was the one therapist out of the four who qualified it as mutual abuse, which the termination I've talked to you about I don't necessarily agree with. But she did see and did understand that there was violence and abuse by Mr. Depp. What was most notable was that after the December 15th, 2015 episode, Ms. Heard called her, in addition to calling Connell Cohen, and reached out to a number of people. But she saw Dr. Anderson in her office, and Dr. Anderson saw 2 bruises on her face and told me, my husband kicked me, and he pushed me, and he punched me in the head. And should I call the police?
Objection, Your Honor,
What should
you're
I
saying.
do?
She's not reading, Your Honor. She's just saying the significance.
Sustain the objection. Next
Okay.
question.
All right. What were your what conclusions did you make as a result of what you reviewed for Dr. Laurel Anderson?
My take of reading Dr. Laurel Anderson's deposition and seeing her, redacted notes was that, from my professional opinion, this was a very serious incident and a very serious allegation of intimate partner violence by Mr. Depp. If a patient and kicked by her partner, I'm going to be very concerned, and I have resources to help that individual. From my professional opinion, this was a very serious incident and a very serious allegation of intimate partner violence by Mr. Depp. If a patient comes into my office with 2 bruises and alleges being pushed, shoved, and kicked by her partner, I'm going to be very concerned, and I'm going to mobilize a lot more resources to help that individual. And for some reason, that did not happen for Ms. Heard.
Objection, compound.
I mean, I don't know how to get it less compound, Your Honor.
Overruled. Go ahead.
Thank you.
So my overall impression of the treatment notes was, there's significant support for the fact that there was intimate partner violence in this relationship. It was consistently reported over time, and there were couples therapists who saw and understood that. There were Mr. Depp also attended a session with Dr. Connell Cohen with Ms. Heard. And in that session, he was very belligerent and mean and yelling and intimidating, and he even got up and stormed out, rolled a joint, and then came back later. Dr. Connell Cohen's impression was this is somebody who's poorly controlled. That's the same thing that Dr. Laurel Anderson said about him. And he stormed out of one of those sessions too. So there were a total of 6 sessions, couple session, but Mr. Depp stormed out of 2 of them. So there were only 4 couple sessions for these 2 individuals in this just highly volatile, highly damaging relationship that was, punctuated by the coercive control and the intimate partner violence.
What, if any, observations did you make about Amber Heard's psychological status over that period?
I mean, the record was very clear that her psychological status deteriorated as she was in the relationship with Mr. Depp. She kept getting worse. She was losing weight. By the end, she was down to, I think, 105 pounds from about 125, 130. She was taking significantly more medication than she's ever taken in her life. She was having more panic, more anxiety, more distress, more affect dysregulation, just really an inability to regulate her mood, more anger outbursts. So it can significantly deteriorate over time.
You talked about weight. What, if any, diagnoses did Bonnie Jacobs make about Amber Heard having an eating disorder?
There was no evidence in the record that Ms. Heard had an eating disorder.
What, if any, observation did you make about whether Dr. Cowan Connell thought she had an eating disorder?
There was no indication in his record that she had an eating disorder.
Now, what, if any, observations did you make about the impact of Mr. Depp's substance abuse?
So the substance abuse was a very relevant and complicating factor to this relationship. When you pair that level of substance abuse with the level of intimate partner violence and coercive control, it's a very, very disastrous mix. And one of the things that happens with the substance abuse is a very similar dynamic that happens with the intimate partner violence. That there's the lying, there's the hiding, there's the cheating, there's the obfuscation, the rationalization about the drinking, the rationalization about the violence, the trying to, promises, I'm going to do better, I'm going to get clean and sober, I'm not going to hit you anymore.
Objection, Your Honor. Can I be heard?
You're going first?
So that was the chin.
What, if any, dynamics and coping styles are connected to the substance abuse by Mr. Depp?
So they share similarities. There's a lot of lying when somebody's a substance abuser. There's a lot of hiding. There's a lot of concealment. There's a lot of rationalization. There's a lot of blame, blaming your partner for your inability to stay clean and sober. There's a lot of the promises to change and the promises to get better. So a lot of these dynamics sort of co-occur, in a situation of substance abuse and domestic violence. They're very similar. The difficulty in this relationship was that the majority of the violent episodes and the sexually violent episodes were in these alcohol and drug-fueled rages. That was predominantly when those happened. When he wasn't in those stages, we still saw the obsessive jealousy and the coercive control and the possessiveness. That still persisted. But when the alcohol and the drugs came together is when Amber Heard was more in danger of being hurt by him.
Why didn't Amber Heard leave the relationship? Similar.
Well, you know why.
Objection, speculation, Your Honor.
Have you formed, based on your experience and based on your 29 hours of clinical evaluation of Amber Heard, what is your understanding of why Amber Heard didn't leave the relationship earlier?
Objection beyond the scope of the disclosure.
It clearly is not. I mean, it's clearly in the disclosure. Now, you indicated that your main opinion was that Amber Heard's report of violence and abuse in her relationship with Mr. Depp is consistent with what is known as intimate partner violence, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And why did you believe that Amber Heard, what formed your basis of that opinion, in a nutshell?
Asked and answered, Your Honor.
Overruled on.
The basis of the opinion was looking at all the dynamics in this relationship, looking at not just the hitting and the yelling, but looking at how much more hitting was done, looking at the coercive control, the obsessive jealousy, the possessiveness, the sexual violence, the choking behavior, the threats to kill. Those are all, as I stated, very significant and often found in cases of lethal domestic violence. Those were significant severity factors, and looking at all those, that's what tipped the scales, that even though she yelled and said some horrible things and hit him, it never was able to shift the balance of power and control in that relationship.
Now, you have discussed with Amber Heard, and you have reviewed and evaluated the emotional impact on Amber Heard as a result of emotional distress as a result of the 3 counterclaim statements, correct? The 3 alleged defamatory statements made by Mr. Depp through Mr. Waldman, correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
Objection,
And-
compound leading.
Just
Overruled. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you. Could you please tell the jury what psychological impact these statements had on Amber Heard?
Yes, so there were 3 statements that I evaluated. May I check my notes to give you the dates and my recollection so that I can be clear?
Since I couldn't put it in, this might be the fastest way, Your Honor.
I'd rather she not address the court.
I'm sorry. Yes. you
Okay.
can- Yes.
So there were 3 statements on April 8th, 2020, April 27th, 2020, and June 24th, 2020 that I queried her about and asked her about. The one that, what happens is if somebody who, like Ms. Heard, has trauma-based symptoms and PTSD, we say that PTSD is a cue-based disorder. There are things that happen in the environment that trigger it and make it worse. And have to refute that your report of violence and abuse is a hoax makes that trauma activated. So it makes the PTSD symptoms at that time become more intense and more severe. So she would have more intrusive thoughts, more nightmares, more sleeplessness, more difficulty engaging with other people, depression, sadness, stress. All of that would happen when one of these statements came out. The one that was, the most difficult was the one where they said that her sexual violence
Objection, Your
was
Honor.
a hoax.
What's the objection?
I think she's going to the, to.
Oh, I'll overrule objection.
Please continue.
The one that was most difficult for Ms. Heard was the statement about calling her sexual violence a hoax. As I stated earlier, most women try very diligently to put that sexual violence in a box, bury it down, not want to talk about it, not want to, have anything related to it come up. And, she's done, by my estimation in her coping, although she suffers from post-traumatic stress disorder, she also has a high degree of coping strategies. But when this would happen, it sort of would just, everything would deteriorate. And this is the one thing that women are always afraid of, that no one's going to believe them. No one's going to take them seriously. And when somebody comes out in the popular media and calls your experience a hoax, that lended itself to more severe psychological and traumatic symptomatology for her.
Dr. Hughes, are all of your opinions that you have provided today within a reasonable degree of psychological probability or certainty?
Yes, they are.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, I think this is a good time to go ahead and break for the day. We can have cross-examination and redirect tomorrow of this witness, of Dr. Hughes. So if you could have a good evening, do not discuss the case with anybody, and don't do any outside research, okay? And we'll see you in the morning. Thank you.
提早. Oh, fucking finally, I can sleep. Fuck you, bitch, Karen. Talk non-stop. Non-stop.
Okay. All right, Dr. Hughes, since you're still in the middle of your testimony, please don't discuss your testimony with anybody, including the attorneys, okay? And anything that you looked at, referenced during your direct examination, if you could just turn that over so they can review that before cross-examination, okay? All right, thank you,
Your
ma'am.
Honor, may I just, I presume she wants to be able to take that back with her. and
We can
review
get copies
overnight.
of it. We'll get whatever it is.
Okay, good.
We'll make sure you get copies of it, which you get copies of it so she can keep her originals. Okay?
Yes, thank you.
All right.
I have copies of everything that I looked at. Other than
Okay,
my
well, no, we're not talking right now. Court's in
Other
session.
than my
Thank you.
question.
All right. So anything else then? So we'll see you tomorrow at 10 a.m., correct? All right. Thank you. Have a good evening.